I stood across the street, watching through the glass. They were all there, laughing, clinking glasses, dressed in the kind of clothes I used to iron for them before special events. I had shown up early, just in case. Fixed my hair, wore my nicest coat, the one with the soft lining. I even put on the pearls their father gave me when we first got married. I thought maybe, just maybe, they were planning something sweet. Something I wasn't supposed to know yet. But when I gave my name to the hostess, she frowned and said, "I'm sorry. There's no reservation under that name." I smiled politely, though my hand started to feel cold. I stepped to the side and called her. Her voice was light, like nothing was wrong. She said, "Mom, we didn't think you'd enjoy this kind of place. Maybe a cheaper diner would suit you better." That's when I knew I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been left out on purpose. And I didn't say a word. I just walked away, with the wind in my coat and something in my heart quietly breaking. Thank you for being here and listening. It means more than I can say. If you're watching this, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Just drop it in the comments below. I'd love to know. I'm 75 years old, and I've spent more of my life giving than keeping. I was 29 when their father passed. He was a quiet man, always humming with a wrench in one hand and love in the other. When I lost him, I had 3 young mouths to feed and a house barely held together. But I didn't crumble. I got up the next morning, made oatmeal from the last of the tin, walked 2 miles to the school district office, and begged for work. I cleaned classrooms at night and stitched clothes by day, saved every penny in an envelope marked tomorrow. That's how I made sure there was always a roof overhead, shoes that fit, and birthday cakes with their favorite icing. I was the one who wrapped every lunch, signed every permission slip, and clapped the loudest at every school play. I missed sleep more than I missed meals, but I never let them feel the absence of a second parent. Our table might have been scratched and narrow, but it was full of food I made from scratch, full of laughter, full of prayers before dinner. Every graduation picture hanging in this house has a plate of my food behind it. Every one of their victories started on my lap, holding a spoon I taught them how to use. And now, they gather at someone else's table. A table I didn't even know was set. I didn't ask for much, I never have. But to be left outside the warmth of the very people I held through fevers, storms, and first heartbreaks, that ache stays longer than any winter. I didn't raise strangers. At least I thought I didn't. I taught them how to hold a fork. Now they dine without me. I still remember the smell of rosemary and roasted meat drifting through the doors as people came and went, holding menus in leather covers and coats with names stitched into the lining. The sidewalk outside that place was slick with rain from earlier in the evening, and I had to be careful not to slip in my small heels. I wore the navy dress I hadn't taken out in years, the one I kept tucked in plastic for special days. I touched up my lipstick in the rearview mirror before walking in. A deep red. The kind I used to wear when their father would take me dancing. It had faded a little by the time I reached the door, smudged by the wind and the waiting. Through the large windows I could see them, my children, my blood, sitting beneath gold lights that hung like stars above their heads. They looked happy, relaxed, dressed in silk and satin, with laughter rising from their table like steam from soup. One of them raised a glass, and the others followed, toasting to something I'll never know. There was even a cake, tall and white, with silver details curling down the sides like lace. I watched them take pictures of it, leaning into one another, arms draped across shoulders I once held through childhood fevers. Not once did anyone turn toward the window. Not once did anyone look up and wonder if something or someone was missing. I kept waiting for a hand to wave, a text to come through, a face to appear in the doorway saying, "You're here, come in." But the only sound that came to me was the laughter from behind glass and the gentle hum of cars passing by. I stood there for a few minutes longer than I cared to admit, not because I thought they'd come to their senses, but because my feet simply didn't want to move. I had raised them with everything I had, my time, my hands, my prayers. And yet there I stood, invisible in the night air, with my lipstick bleeding at the edges and my coat pulled tight against the wind. I didn't walk away because I accepted what they'd done. I walked away because I understood it. And sometimes understanding is colder than any rejection. So I turned, step by step, and made my way back to my quiet car. The city lights sparkled like little betrayals above me. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply drove home in silence, carrying a kind of sadness that doesn't make noise but fills every corner of the heart. The drive home that night was slow. I didn't rush the red lights. I let them change in their own time, just like I let the pain settle without forcing it out. When I got home, I didn't even take off my coat right away. I sat at the edge of the bed, stared at the old photo on the dresser, me holding a bowl of gumbo with my apron still on, and them all around the table, grinning, mouths already messy from the first few bites. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could still smell the garlic and onions sizzling in the cast-iron pan, the lemon zest I always rubbed into the dough for Sunday rolls, the slow warmth of cornbread, fresh from the oven. Those smells were more than food. They were history. I learned to cook from my grandmother. She didn't measure with cups, just with her hands and heart. And I did the same. Every dish I made was rooted in something older than them, something passed down, something sacred. Gumbo with smoked sausage and okra that I had to hunt through 5 stores to find. Roasted chicken rubbed with spices I ground myself every Saturday morning. Homemade lemonade from the tree that barely survived the frost, but still gave just enough fruit if you were patient. My kitchen wasn't large, and the oven took its sweet time warming up, but that didn't matter. The table was where the magic happened. The wooden one, scratched with years of elbows, dropped forks, and birthday candles. They used to sit there and watch me stir pots like I was doing something holy. They'd ask when it would be ready, and I'd smile, wipe sweat from my forehead and say, "When it smells like home." And they'd laugh. They'd help me set the table. They'd sneak bites before I called everyone to sit. I used to lay their napkins out with folded corners, light a little candle even when it wasn't a holiday, and ask them how their day was. They'd tell me about school, about crushes, about the dreams they were starting to shape. I listened. I always listened. Even when I was bone-tired, even when the bills sat unopened on the counter, I made sure they never once felt the hunger I had to dance around in secret. I gave them plates of love. Every spoonful was a memory, a lesson, a comfort. And when they grew up, when they had jobs and cars and choices, I thought that love would follow them. I thought they'd carry it like a compass. But they handed me silence. No more phone calls on Sundays, no more questions about my recipes. Just long gaps between visits and quick texts that said, "Busy this week." I didn't expect them to repay me. I never cooked for payback. But I thought they'd remember. And yet, there I was, sitting alone in the same kitchen where all those meals were made, the same pots hanging on the same hooks, the same worn towel over the sink. Only now, the laughter was gone, and the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. I looked around, and it hit me hard. My kitchen still remembered them. But they had forgotten me. The days that followed moved quietly, like dust in afternoon light. I didn't speak of that night. Not to anyone. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I didn't even wait for them to reach out, though a small, stubborn part of me hoped they would. Not to explain or defend, just to say, "We're sorry, you should have been there." But the phone stayed still. The mailbox stayed empty. And the silence settled in like furniture that had always belonged. I filled my days the way I always have, with little things that keep the heart from crumbling. I watered the African violets in the window, snipped the yellow leaves from the herbs, folded the cloth napkins I still iron even though no one visits for dinner anymore. I swept the porch. I wrote in my journal, not as a writer, but as a woman trying to empty what she couldn't say aloud. Most days I ended up writing the same sentence in different ways. I raised them better than this. I didn't tell anyone, not even my neighbor Dolores, because once words leave your mouth, they change shape. And I needed this ache to stay still, not be poked at or softened by well-meaning hands. I needed to feel it fully. Not just the rejection, but the truth that came with it. Because it wasn't just about a dinner. No, it went deeper. That night was only the echo of a distance that had been growing for years. Little things I ignored, excuses I accepted, holidays they skipped with no explanation, Birthdays reduced to rushed calls and late cards without signatures. They hadn't simply forgotten to include me in that reservation. They had slowly, over time, uninvited me from their lives. Piece by piece, smile by smile. And I had let them. I had clapped when they moved into big homes I'd never been invited to. I had told them I was proud even when their voices sounded bored on the phone. I had made excuses for them when they forgot anniversaries, when they missed their brother's memorial, when they didn't show up to help me after the surgery. I had loved them past every disappointment, believing it was just the season they were in, but now I could see it clearly. It wasn't the season, it was the soil. Something in the roots had gone dry, and I had been too busy pouring into everyone else to notice. I sat with that. Not in anger, but in understanding. The kind that comes when the air is still and there's nothing left to distract you. Just you, and the clock, and the sound of a house that used to be full but now creaks when you walk through it. I didn't cry much. Just once, I think. When I opened the drawer where I keep their old school pictures. Not because of what they did, but because I missed the versions of them that used to run into my arms without needing a reason. I missed the warmth that used to live here. And more than anything, I missed feeling seen. Not as someone to pity or pass by, but as someone who mattered. Someone worth a seat at their table. It was a Tuesday morning when Dolores stopped by with her usual clatter, her slippers dragging across the porch and her knock soft but steady, like she didn't want to startle the air. She had a basket of oranges from her brother's yard and that faint scent of lavender she always carried in her sweater. I had just finished folding napkins again, not because anyone would use them, but because it kept my hands from folding into sorrow. She sat down at the table and looked at me, the way only someone who's watched you live for a long time can. She didn't ask right away. Just passed me the oranges, commented on how my mint plant was blooming too fast for the season, and stirred her tea in slow circles. Then, without looking up, she said, "You've been quieter than usual, and that's saying something. What's been sitting on your heart, love?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if the words would come out heavy or cracked. But something about the way she waited, without pressure, without impatience, made it easier to speak. I told her everything. Not with drama, not with tears, just the truth, plain and sharp. How I had dressed up, how I had stood outside that restaurant watching them laugh without me, what my daughter said. How I walked away with the kind of quiet that doesn't need noise to feel like thunder. Dolores didn't gasp or fuss. She just sat back, shook her head, and let out the kind of laugh that isn't about humor, but disbelief wrapped in affection. Then she said, "You've always been 5 stars in my book. Maybe it's time they get served the reminder." That sentence lingered in the room long after she'd gone. I walked around the house with it tucked in my chest like a secret. I looked at the calendar on the fridge, circled in red from weeks ago. My birthday coming up. 75. I had planned nothing. Just another day, maybe tea with Dolores, maybe sitting on the porch with the breeze for company. But now I felt something stir. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Just clarity. Why should I spend another year shrinking myself to fit the shadows they placed me in? Why should I keep my joy quiet just because they stopped listening for it? I've spent decades giving others something to celebrate. Maybe this time, I give that celebration to myself. And not just a slice of cake on a paper plate, but something that would remind the world, and maybe them too, exactly who I still am. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind was spinning with colors, music, faces I hadn't seen in years, and the soft thrum of something bold. I pulled out an old notebook, the kind with flowered pages and a ribbon to mark the spot, and I started to plan. Not out of spite, not out of hurt, but because for the first time in a long while, I remembered that I didn't need permission to be proud of the life I built. 75 deserves more than silence. It deserves lights, laughter, and music that wraps around the walls like a warm shawl. And if they wouldn't set a place for me at their table, well then, I would set the whole table myself. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the light crawl slowly over the garden bed. There was a calmness in me, but underneath it, something firm had taken root. Not anger, not showmanship, Just a quiet certainty that this year I wouldn't disappear beneath the sound of someone else's laughter. I walked over to the phone, took a breath, and called the same restaurant I had once stood outside of in the cold. The receptionist answered cheerfully, asking how she could help. I told her I'd like to reserve the entire venue. Not just a table, the entire place. She paused, then asked for the date. I gave her my birthday. And as I said the words, something in my chest loosened, like a knot that had been waiting for a reason to come undone. She transferred me to the manager. A kind man with a smooth voice and no memory of what happened weeks before. That suited me fine. I told him I wanted music. Live music. Jazz, the kind with a stand-up bass and a trumpet that makes your heart sway without asking permission. I wanted lighting that felt like golden warmth, not spotlight. I wanted soft tablecloths, real silver, crystal water glasses, and food that came in courses. And most of all, I wanted to celebrate with people who had never forgotten the sound of my voice. Next came the invitations, not the digital kind you send in a rush. I handwrote every name, folded each one into envelopes with gold trim, and had them hand-delivered. I called Mr. Riley from the church choir, who once played piano for my late husband's memorial. I invited Lucille, who still brings pound cake every Easter. I even reached out to a woman I hadn't seen in a decade, one who once held my hand through a dark time and never asked for anything back. Every person on that list had called me by name, not by obligation. They knew my laugh, my stories, my heart, and every one of them accepted without hesitation. Some cried when they got their invite, some called me to say it was about time. A few said they'd be honored. I felt something bloom again, not youth, not vanity, just recognition. Like a mirror finally reflecting back what I'd always hoped they still saw. And no, I didn't send a single invitation to the 3 people who had sat at that other table weeks ago without noticing the absence of the woman who raised them. I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it because this celebration wasn't built on guilt or obligation. It was built on presence, on love that had stayed consistent, even as time moved forward. I didn't need their surprise appearances, their uncomfortable small talk, or their carefully worded apologies. I needed peace. I needed to be surrounded by the kind of love that shows up without needing to be begged. So no, I wasn't being petty. I was being precise. This was not revenge. This was remembrance. A declaration that I am still here, still worth dressing up for. Still worth music and good food and company that doesn't measure you against the cut of your coat or the price tag on your joy. I had spent too many years making room for others. This time I made room for myself. And that room was going to be filled with everything they thought I'd forgotten how to enjoy. The day finally came, and from the moment I woke up, I felt something different in the air. There was no rushing, no worry, no fretting over who might forget. I had laid out my dress the night before, pressed and waiting on the armchair. It was deep emerald, the kind of color that glows under soft light, with a neckline just high enough to feel dignified, and just low enough to say I still remembered how to carry myself. My shoes were sensible, but they sparkled just a little when I moved, and around my neck I wore the same string of pearls their father gave me on our 10th anniversary. I hadn't worn them in years, but that night, they belonged right there, resting where memory meets pride. A car arrived, just like I had arranged. I stepped out of the house without glancing back, and as I sat in the back seat with my gloved hands folded gently in my lap, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. The kind of calm that comes when you know you are exactly where you're supposed to be. The restaurant glowed as we pulled up. Golden lights spilled onto the sidewalk. Music drifted out through the doors like a welcome I had once waited for in vain. This time, I didn't wait outside. I stepped in, and the room turned with me. Not because I made a scene, but because joy carries its own volume. My name was called out gently by the host. And then applause broke out from the guests already inside. My guests. Every face was one I knew, one I had loved, one that had chosen to show up not out of duty, but because they wanted to celebrate with me. I was hugged, kissed on both cheeks, complimented on my dress, my smile, my strength. They said I looked radiant. I believed them. The jazz band began to play, and when that trumpet started at last, I felt the years melt into music. I sat at a round table in the center, surrounded by people who knew how much this day meant. Toasts were made, not just to my age, but to my resilience. They spoke about things I had forgotten I'd done for them. A ride in the rain, a meal when they were broke, a prayer whispered into their life when they needed it most. The photographer I hired moved quietly through the room, catching laughter, soft embraces, the way candles flickered beside wine glasses. My photo was taken near the dessert table, holding a slice of cake I didn't bake but had chosen with care. It tasted like lemon and memory. Later that night, after everyone had left and the lights were dimmed low, I sat in the now quiet restaurant and looked at my phone. The pictures were already online. Smiling faces, the band in mid-note, me standing tall, holding a glass of sparkling cider. The comments started coming. Old friends I hadn't seen in years, former students, distant cousins, even the mayor's wife. And then, I saw their names. My children. One had simply commented, "Wow." Another sent a message asking when the party had been planned. The third left a like, and nothing more. Suddenly, they remembered I existed. Suddenly, they were looking through glass they never thought they'd be on the other side of. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because that night wasn't about what they missed. It was about what I reclaimed. They had left me in the cold weeks ago. But this time, I had stepped into the light on my own. They could scroll through the photos, zoom in on the smiles, even ask around about what they missed. But none of that would give them what I had that night. And I didn't need to explain that to anyone. Because joy, real joy, doesn't come with permission slips or apologies. It comes with presence. And I had mine, finally in full. The next morning I was sitting in my robe, sipping on a second cup of tea that had gone lukewarm in my hands. The house was quiet, the good kind of quiet, where nothing feels missing because everything is right where it should be. I was flipping through the photos from the night before, smiling at the way my friend Lucille had danced with her husband like they were still 25, and the way the band leader had tipped his hat to me before the final note. Then the phone rang. I knew the number before it even lit up. I stared at it for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to answer with peace, not wait. So I breathed in, let the steam from the tea fill the space between my chest and the ache that used to live there, and I picked up. Her voice came through sharp. Not angry, not kind, just edged with something between confusion and offense. She didn't even start with hello. She just said, "Why didn't you invite us?" Not a pause, not a flicker of apology, just a question that sat heavy on the line, expecting me to scramble. But I didn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain or defend. I simply smiled into the receiver, the way you smile when you finally stepped out of someone else's shadow. I said as warm and gentle as ever, "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't think you'd enjoy this kind of place. Thought maybe a cheaper diner would suit you better." And I let that sentence sit exactly where it needed to sit. Not as a jab, not as revenge, but as a mirror. One that I didn't tilt, just held steady, so she could see herself in it clearly. The other end of the line went silent, long enough for me to hear the sound of the clock ticking in my kitchen, and the soft creak of the old chair I was sitting in. I imagined her face, not because I wanted her to hurt, but because I wondered if, in that moment, she truly understood what she had said that night. Words don't vanish just because time passes. They echo, and some echoes come back louder when the world finally quiets down. She started to say something, maybe a defense, maybe a backtrack. But I stopped her. Not with force, just with truth. I said, "I served what you gave me, just colder." And that was all I needed to say. I didn't lecture her. I didn't pull out years of pain. I just gave her a taste of her own recipe. Not to shame her, to show her, to let her feel what it means to be shut out with a smile, dressed in politeness but lined with distance. She hung up not long after that. No goodbye. Just the soft sound of a call ending. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just sat there, tea still in hand, the light shifting on the floor beside me, and thought to myself, sometimes the most honest thing you can do is to let someone feel the temperature of their own choices. Not out of spite, but because not every lesson comes with a warning. Some come with reflection. And sometimes silence is the most eloquent answer of all. Not long after the call ended, the messages started pouring in like rain after a long dry spell. First came the one from my oldest son. Short, sharp, "You're being dramatic." That was all it said. No greeting, no softness, just those words typed out like I was a nuisance, like my absence at their dinner table should have been expected, and my celebration without them was some kind of offense. Then another came in, this time from the middle one. "It was just one dinner," he wrote, like a single evening could be plucked from the years of effort I poured into them and weighed on its own. As if what they did hadn't been a final straw, resting on a whole stack of moments where I had been made to feel like background noise in their lives. I read the messages, every word, every line, and then set the phone down without typing a single thing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was simply done explaining myself to people who had stopped listening long ago. Because it wasn't just one dinner. It wasn't just one missed call or one forgotten birthday. It was the 1,000 little ways they had pushed me to the edge of their lives, while still expecting me to smile and clap from the sidelines. I had always been the one to call first. The one to forgive quickly. The one to give the benefit of the doubt even when it scraped at my spirit. I excused the short visits. I accepted the cheap gifts with fake smiles. I listened when they needed me, even when I had nothing left to give. And somewhere along the way they started to believe that my silence was agreement, that my absence of complaint meant I was content. But what they never understood is that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's restraint. And that night, when I booked that restaurant, when I chose who would sit beside me and who wouldn't, that wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of remembering who I was before their approval started shaping me. So no, I didn't respond. I didn't correct them. I didn't try to explain that it was never about one meal or one evening. Because I knew that anyone who truly knew my heart, anyone who had ever sat at my table and tasted my love in every bite, wouldn't need an explanation at all. They would have known. They would have been there. Let them send their texts. Let them try to fold my life into a box labeled overreaction. I've lived too long and loved too hard to shrink back into silence now. I won't argue with people who only see me when they feel ignored. I won't explain dignity to those who treated it like a nuisance. I won't meet tears that come too late with tissues. Some things deserve quiet. And my quiet wasn't passive. It was powerful. It was earned. It was mine. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't burn the old photographs or throw away the holiday cards from years past. I simply let it all settle into a part of me that no longer needed to be tended to. I turned my attention toward the things that still made me feel alive, not just needed. I started in the garden. The soil hadn't forgotten me. I pulled the weeds slowly, whispering to the roots like I used to when I first planted those marigolds. My hands, though slower now, remembered every motion. The mint came back with more strength than I expected. The tomatoes struggled a bit, but I liked the challenge. I planted new herbs, ones I hadn't dared try before. And every morning, I stepped out barefoot into the dew, not to escape anything, but to return to something I had left waiting too long. I found my old painting set tucked behind a stack of dusty cookbooks. The brushes were stiff at first, but warm water and time brought them back. I painted the sunflowers that bloomed along the fence line. I painted the chipped teacup Dolores gave me with violets curling around the rim. I didn't care if it was good. I cared that it was mine. Each stroke on canvas felt like a breath I had been holding and finally let out. I painted not for walls or compliments, but for silence that spoke kindly to me. Then there was the poetry circle. Dolores invited me. She said the women were warm and didn't talk too much unless the poem called for it. I went one afternoon, sat in a room with other faces shaped by years, each one holding their own quiet thunder. We read lines that reminded us of childhood, of grief, of dancing in kitchens when no one was watching. I shared one I'd written years ago about a tree that held secrets. They listened. No one interrupted. No one corrected the way I read it. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had heard me without needing to fix or define me. Sundays became something sweet again. I started setting out tea for friends, using the good cups, the ones with the gold rims that had waited too long in the cabinet. We sat on the porch or in the kitchen, depending on the weather. The conversations didn't revolve around gossip or obligation. They were slow, kind, full of memory and laughter that didn't demand to be louder than the wind. I baked small things. Shortbread, lemon cake, sometimes just toast with honey. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about sharing what I had in the softest, simplest way. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was performing. I wasn't waiting for praise. I wasn't trying to earn a seat at someone else's table. I was simply living. Quietly. Honestly. Surrounded by people who saw me not as something they outgrew, but as someone who still had something beautiful to offer. There was peace in that. Not the kind that comes with silence after chaos, but the kind that rises slowly, like warm bread in the oven, filling every corner of your life with something steady. I used to think I needed their approval to feel whole again. But I didn't. I needed space. I needed truth. And I needed time to come back to myself without apology. And that's exactly what I found. It was a Thursday afternoon. The kind that comes wrapped in stillness, where the breeze feels soft and nothing feels urgent. I had just come in from the garden, bits of soil still under my nails, the smell of rosemary clinging to my sleeves. I was humming something quiet, something familiar, when I heard it. A knock at the front door. Not the usual tap of the mail carrier or the playful rhythm of Dolores. This one was hesitant, almost like it didn't want to be heard, but needed to be. I wiped my hands slowly, not because I was stalling, but because I had no reason to rush anymore. When I opened the door, there she was. My daughter. Standing on the step in a coat that didn't quite match the weather, eyes puffy, cheeks pale, holding a bouquet of white lilies that looked like they were chosen in a hurry. Her lips parted as if the words might leap out on their own, but nothing came right away. She just stood there clutching those flowers like they might explain everything she couldn't say. I waited. Not coldly, not cruelly, just quietly. Finally she spoke, voice soft and frayed. "We didn't know you felt that way." The words landed heavy not because they were unexpected, but because they arrived so late. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The way her shoulders curved inward, the way her shoes were damp at the toes, the way guilt sat on her face like makeup worn too long. I didn't reach for her. I didn't invite her in. I didn't pretend that a few wilted petals could erase the silence that had grown between us like ivy on an old wall. I simply said, "Now you do." That was all. Nothing more, no speech, no flood of memories. Just the truth, plain and still. She blinked, held the bouquet tighter, and looked down at her shoes. The silence stretched between us, not awkward, not angry, just full of everything that had gone unsaid for too long. She didn't try to come inside. I didn't offer. There was no grand reunion, no swelling music, no tearful embrace. But there was something else, something stronger. There was acknowledgement. There was accountability. And sometimes that matters more than forgiveness handed out too quickly. She turned to go, slowly, without looking back. And I closed the door gently behind her, not with bitterness, but with the understanding that healing doesn't always come with a hug. Sometimes it comes with a boundary held firm, and a truth spoken without shaking. I carried the flowers into the kitchen, placed them in a vase, watched the petals open just a little more in the sun. They were beautiful, but they didn't change the air in the room. They didn't erase the ache that had already been aired out. And they didn't need to, because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for recognition, not for apology. I had already stepped forward. And she had finally caught a glimpse of the space she left behind. Sometimes the best way to teach someone your value is to stop showing up where they refuse to see it. I wasn't asking for favors. I wasn't chasing a chair at their table. I was asking to be remembered, not just out of tradition, but out of love. They thought I wanted steak. I wanted respect. They served me silence. I returned it, plated in truth, seasoned with dignity, and yes, served cold. If you've ever been left out by people you once fed, once raised, once waited up for in the dark, tell me below. Or just write, "I'm healing now." That's enough. Please subscribe if you've ever had to carry your own worth in silence. If your kindness was mistaken for weakness this light, it's for you. Thank you for watching.